So, I don't like to toot my own horn, but I must say my new Atlas setup is damn good. It might even be the best setup that I've ever made. This setup is so well rounded, it has great defense, it does amazing damage, like this thing will straight up one-shot acolytes, it's fun to play, and it's completely faffless. There is no faff, you just play it and have fun. But it is not just a build, it is an entire setup, and we're gonna go through it one item at a time. Okay, so buckle up, because this might take a while. First up, we have Atlas himself. The build runs Brief Respite as its aura, which helps a lot with defense. Landslide builds tend to be pretty beefy by default, because Landslide makes you immortal while you're landsliding. But they're fairly squishy outside of Landslide, when you're running towards an enemy and they're shooting at you as you're trying to get in range. This is where Brief Respite is really good, because as you're landsliding, you're converting the energy you're using for landslide into shield, so when you're out of landslide, you have some shields to trigger a shield gate. Next on the menu, we have Cunning Drift in the Exiles as well as Stretch. This gives us 60% extra range. Now, you might think that range on a landslide build isn't all that important, but that's not true, because the area of effect on landslide grows quite a bit with extra range. This makes the build more energy efficient because you have to cast fewer landslides, and it makes the build a lot safer because, as I've just mentioned with Brief Respite, you are most vulnerable when you're trying to get in range for landslide, and power range increases the range at which you can landslide. Moving on from there, we have Fleeting Expertise because we need a lot of efficiency even though we're running Rubble Heap. Now, Rubble Heap might seem somewhat counterintuitive here because it makes Landslide free if you're above 1400 rubble, which invalidates Brief Respite and Fleeting Expertise, but getting above 1400 rubble in a non-endless mission or in a full squad is pretty difficult. So it's just a nice bonus that can sometimes kick in if you're in the right mission. And if you don't find yourself very often in the right kind of mission for Rubble Heap, you can easily take it out and replace it with something else. It's not that important. Next on the menu, we have Path of Statues, which is a very nice augment that leaves behind a petrification trail as we landslide. This allows us to build rubble by just landsliding, so we don't have to use petrify. This, just like Rubble Heap, is mostly for endless missions because in normal missions we do way too much damage. We one-shot most things so they don't have time to get petrified. But even in non-endless missions you will get some rubble. Next up, we have Primed Continuity. This balances out the duration loss from Fleeting Expertise. This is here so that the petrification duration as well as the combo window lasts a decent amount of time. Then we slap in a bit of strength with Intensify. I used to run this with more strength, but you really don't need it, you have more than enough damage here. And then I actually put in Gladiator Aegis to give myself slightly more armor, as well as another set piece for the Gladiator set bonus. This fixes an issue that I had with the build for a long time, where it was very unpredictable. You'd be fine, you'd be fine, you'd be fine, and then you would just instantly die out of nowhere. I tried everything I could think of to fix it, and in the end all I needed was just a bit more armor, because the moments I would die were very specific. It was usually towards the start of the mission, I didn't have any rubble, I wasn't landsliding, and my shield gating would go down. It was fairly rare, but not rare enough, and it started to get annoying. And while it still happens every now and then, it doesn't happen anywhere near as often now that I have that extra armor. Because, well, the build can just take more damage. And finally, we have Catalyzing Shields for shield gating. This works really well with Brief Respite. Now, for Arcanes, we have Mod Augmented, which is insanely good because it provides up to 60% power strength at 250 kills. This is strictly for endless missions, it doesn't really work in non-endless stuff, but then again, you only need the extra damage from this in endless missions as the enemies scale up. And then I'm running Arcane Nullifier, which I really need to max out because not having energy on this build is certain death. Next, we have Archon Shards, and we have quite the mixture here. I have one Amber with maximum energy float on spawn. This just helps get into the mission without having to worry about energy at all, which is always nice. I have two Crimsons for 10% ability strength at pop, which is just a nice bit of extra damage. And finally, I have two Azures with 5 health regenerated per second. It might seem strange to put a relatively small amount of healing over time on a frame that can heal itself through rubble, but again, you have to remember, in some missions we do so much damage we don't generate much rubble. It's not mandatory though, you can just cast Petrify and get rubble that way whenever you get low on health, so you don't necessarily have to run the shards, but they make the build feel a lot nicer. You need some sort of health sustain though, because if you don't have any health sustain, you're eventually just gonna die. Next up, we have the stat stake. The best stat stakes by far are in Carnon melee weapons, because evolutions like Absolute Valor affect pseudo-exalted abilities like Landslide. This is what allows us to red crit with Landslide. The best one, and the one I use, is the Ceramic Dagger, dagger because it gives you the biggest crit bonus, but as long as it has this kind of evolution, any Incarnon will do. Also, if you don't mind rebuilding your combo counter every now and then, it is worthwhile activating the Incarnon mode because the bonus melee damage from Incarnons carries over to pseudo exalts as well. Now, the build I run on the ceramic dagger is extremely crit heavy, okay? It has Gladiator Might and Organ Chatter for crit damage, as well as Blood Rush and Sacrificial Steel for crit chance. This is why, if you look at the footage, you will see red crits that have an exclamation point behind them. Some people were actually confused by this in one of my previous videos. And basically, if a red crit has an exclamation point behind it, it's more than a red crit. Because we have more than 3 tiers of crits. We have yellow, orange and red, but then you can go beyond that, and that's when you get an exclamation point. But anyway, we have Sacrificial Pressure for raw damage, Primed Fever Strike, and I have Vicious Frost for viral damage, though ideally you would want to run North Wind, but because of the way I have my ceramic dagger polarized, it doesn't fit. So I'm actually losing a bit of damage here, but it's not that big of a deal. And to top it all off, I'm running Gladiator Rush for the extra combo duration, which is nice if you're not using Naramon, and you also get the set bonus on top of that. A very important part of this build is melee exposure. It doesn't matter what rank you have, because the maximum stacks are always the same, and this build builds and sustains the stacks very easily. But you absolutely 100% want to run this, because this gives you almost the equivalent of Primed Fever Strike and Shocking Touch worth of corrosive damage. This is a humongous damage increase, and it works really well on Landslide, perhaps the best out of all the pseudo exalts, because Landslide has terrible status chance, so you don't really care about the damage and status distribution. So those are the basics. This is what you need to get the build working. But there is more stuff you can do if you want to. For my energy sustain, I primarily use the Grimoire with Zata's Invocation, which works really well on this, and I also run secondary Dexterity here to get more combo duration. This is absolutely top notch on a build like this, because you do not have to worry about energy sustain at all. I never even have to fire the Grimoire, just a passive recharge on the secondary fire is more than enough to sustain me through everything. Also, I would highly recommend you run Mitre with the neutralizing Justice Augment if you're gonna fight Corpus or Corrupted. Nullifiers are absolute hell for this build because they exploit your one weakness, being shot at while not landsliding. So again, if you're gonna fight Corpus or Corrupted, bring a Mitre. For my pet of choice, I have Helios Prime with Duplex and Vicious Bond for Armor Strip, and I combine that with a Deconstructor Prime that's modded for Viral. And as far as focus goes, well, if you're gonna copy my setup 1-for-1, then it doesn't matter and you can run whatever you want, but if you're not gonna run the Grimoire, I would recommend Zenuric for energy sustain, and if you don't have primary and secondary dexterity, I would recommend Naramon so that you don't lose your combo counter. And that is pretty much it for my new Landslide setup, so I thank you very much for watching as always guys, and I hope you will give this setup a shot because it is super fun and very strong. And I would also like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, I really appreciate your support, it means a lot to me. And if, by the way, you would like to become a channel member as well, you can check out the memberships and stuff down below. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.